Margaret Wilson's hands had trembled for as long as she could remember. The subtle quiver of her fingers had been her companion since her teenage years, an invisible thread that stitched itself into every decision she made, every task she undertook, every dream she cautiously allowed herself to pursue. At first, people dismissed it as nerves. "She's just anxious," they would say, or perhaps an inherited quirk. But for Margaret, the tremor became an ever-present reminder that her body had secrets it refused to share. And yet, when her hands finally stopped trembling for the very first time, no one noticed. The absence of the quiver was not dramatic. There was no fanfare, no gasp of revelation. It was quiet, almost invisible. But for Margaret, the stillness felt both miraculous and haunting, as if the world itself had paused to reveal an unsettling truth. She was capable of control, but only when life demanded it most. In her youth, Margaret had been a nurse at Portland General Hospital. The year was 1995, and the emergency department pulsed with energy that never slept. On that particular night, the corridors were flooded with patients from a pileup on the interstate. Sirens screamed, paramedics barked updates, and the metallic scent of blood mingled with disinfectant. Margaret moved through the chaos, her hands shaking as they always did, her colleagues glancing at her with a mixture of respect and hesitation. Everyone knew about Margaret's tremor. Patients occasionally asked, "Are you all right?" She would smile, brush it off, and continue. But that night, under the blinding fluorescent lights and the weight of dozens of lives depending on her, something extraordinary happened. A patient arrived with crushed ribs, his chest rising and falling like a machine on the brink of failure. Margaret leaned in, adrenaline flooding her veins, fear whispering in her ears. She reached for the chest tube, and her tremor vanished. Her hands, so often unreliable, were now steady, deliberate, powerful. She inserted the tube flawlessly, saving the man's life. The steadiness lasted only minutes, but the memory imprinted itself into her soul. It haunted her like a secret miracle, one she could neither summon at will nor fully explain. When, years later, doctors confirmed Parkinson's disease, Margaret thought back to that night. Perhaps the tremor was destiny, she reasoned. But still, she could not shake the memory of the times, rare, fleeting, extraordinary, when her body betrayed its own diagnosis and offered her steadiness in moments of highest urgency. At home, her daughter Emma became her anchor. Margaret filled photo albums with pictures of Emma's childhood, birthdays, trips to the coast, afternoons in the backyard with crayons and chalk. The photos were often blurred, the edges softened by her shaky grip on the camera, but Emma never minded. "They look alive, Mom," she once said, her small hands flipping through the pages. Margaret smiled, though deep down she feared that someday Emma might see her mother not as strong, but as fragile. As Margaret's condition worsened, she began journaling. Her handwriting, shaky, uneven, sometimes almost illegible, filled notebook after notebook. But what she captured was not merely symptoms. Her words traced her inner world, her fear of decline, her awe at life's small beauties, her desperate hope that Emma would remember her as more than her illness. These journals became her sanctuary, the place where she could confess that she longed to be steady, not for herself, but for her child. It was around this time that she met Dr. Alan Reeves, a neuroscientist known as much for his brilliance as for the controversies surrounding him. Reeves believed the brain held uncharted capacities, and he was willing to push boundaries to uncover them. His partnership with Hexen Pharmaceuticals had granted him vast resources, though many whispered that Hexen's motives were more financial than altruistic. When Reeves encountered Margaret, he saw not just a patient, but a mystery, a neurological paradox that defied textbook explanations. Her brain, he observed, seemed to override the tremor during moments of heightened emotion or danger. To Reeves, this was not merely interesting, it was revolutionary. What if resilience could be harnessed, replicated, even sold? What if Margaret's fleeting steadiness was not a quirk, but a blueprint? Margaret, however, remained cautious. She had lived long enough to recognize the difference between compassion and exploitation. Reeves spoke in sweeping visions. "We could change medicine forever, Margaret. Your case could help millions." But she had heard promises before, and she sensed the corporate shadow looming behind his words. She shared her history, even let him read portions of her journals, but she refused to become a specimen in Hexon's laboratory. Reeves was torn, fascinated by her uniqueness, yet increasingly aware that she was more than data. Years later, her tremors worsened, her steps slowed. Yet life, in its unpredictability, returned her to that place where her shaking vanished. It happened in a metro station on an ordinary Tuesday. The station was alive with sound, train brakes screeching, vendors calling out, children laughing as their footsteps echoed across the tiled floor. Margaret moved with the crowd, her umbrella dripping from the rain outside, when suddenly a man collapsed in front of her. His body struck the ground with a sickening thud. Panic erupted. Some people froze, others fumbled with phones, a few shouted for help. But no one acted. Margaret's eyes widened, her heart pounded, and instinct surged. She looked at her trembling hands, then at the man's lifeless body, and in that instant, the tremor stopped. She dropped to her knees, pressed her palms to his chest, and began compressions. Each push was steady, rhythmic, strong. The crowd fell silent, watching this gray-haired woman work with the precision of a machine and the urgency of love. She counted under her breath, sweat forming at her temples. Time stretched, the world narrowing to the beat of her hands on the man's chest. By the time paramedics arrived, his pulse had returned. He lived. The station erupted in applause, but Margaret only leaned back, trembling once more. Not in her hands this time, but in her breath. Strangers stared at her with awe, whispering of a miracle. The story spread quickly. The nurse whose tremor stilled to save a life. Newspapers called her a hero. Television anchors replayed grainy cell phone footage of the event. Margaret became a symbol, though she had never sought attention. For her, it had simply been instinct, the same instinct that had steadied her hands years earlier in the hospital. But fame brought consequences. Hexon saw opportunity. To them, Margaret was not a hero, but a commodity. Reeves, now older and more conflicted, struggled with his conscience. He wanted to study her, yes, but also to protect her. He saw how Emma clung to her mother, terrified that one day corporations would claim her story, stripping it of humanity until it was nothing but data in a sterile lab. Emma herself had grown into a young woman, sharp and protective. She loved her mother fiercely, yet feared what the world might take from her. She remembered the photographs, the shaky handwriting, the tender moments when Margaret's illness seemed irrelevant. To Emma, the true miracle was not that her mother's tremor vanished under pressure, but that she continued to love, to fight, to live despite it. Margaret's journals became artifacts of her resilience. In them, Reeves found revelations no machine could capture. The way she described silence after saving a life. The way she wrote about Emma's laughter as medicine. The way she confessed her fear that she was being studied more than understood. Reeves realized that while science could dissect neurons, it could never quantify love. Debates erupted across medical conferences. Some claimed Margaret's condition was a rare neurological phenomenon, a surge of dopamine and adrenaline colliding in just the right way. Others argued it proved the mind had powers not yet mapped. But for those who had seen her in the metro station, explanations didn't matter. They had witnessed a woman defy her illness, and in doing so, restore life. As the years passed, Margaret aged gracefully but inevitably. The tremors grew harsher, her body weaker, yet her story endured. To the world, she was a mystery. To Emma, she was still Mom, the woman who tucked her in, who laughed through her shaking, who braided her hair even when her hands refused to obey. In her final journal entry, written with unsteady lines, Margaret posed a question she could never answer. Was it science, or was it love that stilled my hands when it mattered most? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it was neither. But what remained undeniable was this: courage is not the absence of weakness, but the choice to act in spite of it.